Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge after a long absence. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, for episode number 200. 200 attempts to start a show on time, 200 missed cues, 200 files that don't work. Do you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I got levels. Come on. Hello. Nobody hearing me? 200. Okay, some people are not hearing things. I'm hearing things. I see things. I see audio input. I'm assuming that's coming out there. Okay, they have sound. Fantastic. I hate to break the record on the 200 show, So, good to be back. Sorry about the delay. It's usually just seems like I'm just going to have to miss tonight, and sometimes I have to miss tonight twice, and last time I had to miss tonight 3 times. But it's good to be back. I hope everybody's doing well on this day before Thanksgiving, which reminds me, got to get that. Scotty's been having all kinds of problems. Not Scott's fault. Facebook is having a hard time posting things. So I want to make sure, after this is over, we make sure our Thanksgiving message is up. So other than that, everything is good. I'm trying to think if there's anything really pressing or noticeable. We haven't had a talk since the election, actually. So I really kind of just think, given how long we've been gone, we probably should just jump right into it. Why don't we do that? So let's see what we have here. Yeah, we'll get as many done as we can. Come on, baby. All right, here we go. Coming in order of most relevant. Can I change that to highest ranked? No, they just... I've never understood Facebook. It just changes everything all the time. Here we go. All right, well, we're just going to dig into it because it's, like I say, episode 200, and we got a bunch of mail we got to move. So let's see how this thing plays out and see if I can get my windows positioned in such a way that I can read the comments and the questions as well. That looks pretty good. Okay, here we go. Starting with Matt Harris. Hey, Matt. Matt has a non-political question. How do you celebrate Thanksgiving in the Whittle household? What does Natasha think of the holiday? You could ask her. She's watching. She better be watching. It's my favorite holiday. We've had a couple of really quiet ones. There is some news to share, and that is that I learned that when I actually breathe, my voice gets a little more deep and interesting. Isn't that clever? So I'm going to have to do a little more breathing in the future. Anyway, we had a quiet year last year. We're going to have a quiet year this year. But 2 years ago, not long after she arrived in September, we went to down to Orange County, and I don't want to say that I cooked the traditional Thanksgiving meal, but I did assemble it out of pieces made by Boston Market, and had a chance to introduce, I don't know, 6, 7, 3, 4, at least 6 Russians to their first Thanksgiving dinner and what it was all about. And that's just my favorite meal in the world. The turkey dinner is just my favorite meal in the world. My Aunt Marty's not with us anymore because if she was, I would drive to Pennsylvania just to get the yams. She takes about 4 days to cook those things, I think. Otherwise it's pretty quiet, and that's okay. It's a real personal holiday. I know Natasha likes it. I like it. There's obviously an awful lot to be grateful for. But the one thing that I keep noticing, watching, seeing America through the eyes of my Russian wife, is just how fundamentally happy most people are, really friendly anyway. We tend to shop late at the supermarket. We're there when they're stacking the boxes, and they're just horsing around. And, you got 15 guys in there just doing nothing but nasty work of hauling out these big, enormous cartons and putting big tins and stuff on the shelves, and everybody's laughing and joking and kidding around, and we take so much of it for granted that it's really hard to appreciate just how kind of novel and unique that is. That's certainly why we keep doing what we do here. I'd like to keep things that way. And, as I think I mentioned on the Thanksgiving show, there's so much that's been chipped away, and they continue to chip away. But it's a pretty big rock, Most of the stuff is still here, and still able to say whatever we want to about pretty much anything we want to, and in my case, because of membership, anything I want to. And we don't have to worry about getting mortared on the way to the supermarket or anything else like that. So it's great. It's great to live in a country where at least half the country still believes in the things that made it possible. It's of course, this holiday can't be taught anymore, except as another example of our ability to exterminate the Indians. One thing I did learn since last Thanksgiving is I learned an awful lot more about the Puritans. I got really heavily into the English Civil War for about a month there, and Oliver Cromwell and kind of the philosophical basis for the people that stepped off of the Mayflower. We always have that image. It's indelibly printed on our minds on Thanksgiving. You get the guy coming off the boat in the black pants and the black jacket with the little white collar and the tall black hat. And these are what pilgrims are. And we know pilgrims are religious, but that's pretty much about it. Why don't we know more really about what they believed? And they never teach it. It was a really amazing philosophy, and as I understand it, in England, exceedingly democratic for the time. Took the Reformation, Protestantism, about as far as it could go. We don't need any. We don't need churches in terms of steeples. We don't need any ornamentation. We talk directly to God through Jesus, and there you go. But it is it was a strict religion, and a lot of people are on the left, especially, are constantly denouncing our Puritan background. But there would be no America without the Puritan background. I don't think the entire idea of a country that could be governed on its own because the people were fundamentally virtuous was revolutionary and unique. And many other places were settled by other countries that didn't have that belief, and they didn't turn out as well. So anyway, it's just an amazing thing to live here. Just to be able to live here is a really remarkable gift, and for the life of me, I cannot imagine living anywhere else. There's certainly no place else I'd like to go. You think about things going really south in America, and maybe going to New Zealand or Canada or something like that, and it's like, I don't know, man. There's an awful lot of Montana and Wyoming out there, and the Dakotas, and I've flown over a fair amount of it, and I just love this country, and I don't intend to give it up. So despite the fact that California is in for more man-made earthquakes in the form of Gavin Newsom, and the homeless situation just out of control and more every day, it's unbelievable how filthy this town is, and San Francisco's worse by all accounts. But there's always Texas and Nevada and a bunch of other solid, sensible places. I almost included Arizona in that, but after the last election, I'm not quite so sure. So they wanted a communist, they're going to get their communist. We'll see how it works out for them. Anyway, so Matt, it's pretty quiet for us, and we kind of celebrate Thanksgiving pretty much every day. I was certainly aware of it. And it's especially hard on my beautiful wife because, she's gone a little over 2 years away from your country, and right around then that homesickness really kicks in, and it's, it's hard. If I was living in Moscow for 2 years, I don't know what I would do. I know for a certain fact I would find as many loud and stupid Americans as I possibly could, and spend a lot of time, singing the theme song from Gilligan's Island with those guys. But it's an amazing life. I never had any idea I could be this happy, and it's been absolutely amazing. And I like this year a lot better than I like last year, and I like last year better than the year before. So that's a good trend. Let's see, moving down here. This is a top fan, so we absolutely have to answer this one from Cameron C. Smith with the top fan star, and that's a cool thing to have. Hey, Cameron, how are you? He's asking, Bill, how in the hell were the rebels in The Last Jedi planning on dropping bombs onto a First Order dreadnought in space? Also, have you noticed the name for the courageous male figure is one letter away from being Pooh? Yeah, I've noticed that. Poe, I'm not quite so upset about Poe Dameron, only because I'm utterly convinced that George Lucas names his characters by just random gibberish. I mean, I think if I take a second to relax, I'm sure I can get into that kind of mode. Like, let's see, Ben Vartan and Laru Podim and Datui Vlor. Yeah, you get the idea. Just gibberish. But I like the character of Poe Dameron, strangely enough, because he's a heroic, strong male fighter pilot. We're not going to open up that can of worms, at least not today anyway, on what Star Wars, what the social justice warriors have inflicted on Star Wars. But they killed it, which is, it's a tough thing to kill, but they pretty much did. So I'm very, very curious to see what's going to happen with the 9th movie. My hope is that it's going to be like the ending of the Bob Newhart show, where he's the second Bob Newhart show, where he's running the country inn in Vermont. And the final episode, he wakes up and he's back in bed with Suzanne Pleshette from his previous series and said the whole thing was just a terrible dream. That would be cool. And that was probably the most clever piece of TV writing I've ever seen. I remember it was really, really funny. There are, I think the bigger issue, Cameron, is the business about dropping bombs onto a dreadnought in space. Now, that bothers some people, and it doesn't bother others, but the ones that it bothers are the ones that these people should be showing a little more respect to. I mean, everybody I know who saw that movie, everybody I know just, what? And this is what's unusual about it. This is what actually I think could become an interesting discussion for a moment here. So, for those of you that haven't seen it, and if you haven't, don't be in any particular hurry to. But at the opening scene in the last Star Wars movie, in The Last Jedi, they've got fighter screen going in, and they're trying to protect these bombers, and these bombers are coming in over a spaceship. And they open bomb bay doors, and round bombs just drop out. They just drop down onto the spaceship. Now, what's interesting to me is that I know every single person that I was with and everybody I've ever talked to who saw that just went, come on. But no one ever went, come on, when you see this starfighter banking and turning between these laser cannons going in. And all of those aerodynamic flight models are completely as ridiculous as having, gravity-fed bombs. So why does one work and the other one not? That's the interesting question, I think. I think it's got to do with, maybe it's just got to do with pushing your luck, Cameron? I mean, we expect space fighters, which I personally don't believe will ever exist, certainly not in the form that you see them now. We expect space fighters to behave like fighter airplanes, and clearly, without question, The original Star Wars movie and everything that followed was, and Star Citizen 2 for that matter, is pretty much set in World War II. You've got manned turrets, you've got engagement ranges of a mile, maybe usually less. You've got humans doing pretty much everything, including targeting weapon systems and stuff like that. I mean, Luke never turned on his smart bomb and let the optically guided, photon bomb take out the Death Star with impunity from, 30 miles away. So there's a lot of it that we expect to believe, and we don't really understand enough about how things move in space to be terribly offended by the starfighters. In fact, you have the starfighters, the X-wings have to do what they do. Because if they don't, it's something else. So Star Wars, as many people have obviously mentioned since it came out, it's science fantasy. But it is interesting to me that we'll buy the spaceships and we'll buy the banking and turning, we'll buy visible laser bolts, that appear to be moving slower than the speed of sound, if I'm any kind of a guess at all, and we don't buy these bombs coming out of this thing. And I think it's because you push, I think you just pushed your luck. You went too far with it. And it's lazy. Everything about that movie is lazy. And everything after Empire Strikes Back is lazy, progressively lazier. And lazy writing is, that's like the unforgivable sin to me, I don't like writers who write about things they don't know about. That's usually pretty obvious, but when you're just so lazy that you just do things like that, it's just very hard. It's very hard for a guy like me not to feel just a lot of contempt for that. Putting aside how much money they make doing it. Eric Blake says Rogue One was amazing. Rogue One was amazing. I thought Rogue One was the best Star Wars movie since Empire Strikes Back. Rogue One was terrific. Rogue One was gritty and it was meaningful. It had an interesting plot. It had a great plot, as a matter of fact, and can show what could have been done. I thought Solo could have been a good movie if they only found a guy who somewhat resembled a young Harrison Ford instead of a young Jack Black. But anyway, so it doesn't have to be lazy. The script, I thought the script for Rogue One was really, really excellent. And the idea that the designer of the Death Star put that fatal flaw in there on purpose is one of the greatest payoffs of a setup in film history. It took practically half a century to pay off that there's a little vent here that goes directly to the core, isn't that convenient? Well, it turns out that kind of going back and sketching things in is just tremendous. DCG44S cuts right to the chase. This is the answer. He says, Starfighter's maneuvering is entertaining and exciting, so we accept it, dropping bombs or not. I think that's a lot of it, and I also think, too, to some degree, that the dropping of the bombs thing is still, the political correctness of that scene kind of pulls you out of it. It's just lazy. Now, the one thing I've been since I don't get to pick the questions, and I'm glad I don't, so it's not like I decided to wander back into this territory. Somebody asked. So I was looking a lot at the message boards for months and months after that movie came out, because Star Wars is post-Christian American religion, and the social justice warriors have destroyed that religion, and there's a lot of angry people about that. And one of the things they're most angry about is, aside from the obvious storytelling catastrophe, is how lazy writers have introduced things which they think are just a gimmick, like a plot device, but they're so lazy and they're so stupid when it comes to the Star Wars franchise that they do things that they think look cool, and in fact do look cool, but they don't make any sense. And to have this happen this way, you have to it undoes the entire pre-existing universe. And the example of that, of course, is when is when she engages the hyperspace drive, and cuts through the entire, Imperial fleet. It's a spectacular visual. It's just breathtaking visual, and it's a clever idea. But as many people pointed out, well, if that's all it takes to cut right through one of this gigantic, enormous dreadnought, then why don't we just put a hyperdrive on a droid and have it go right through? In other words, if you can use the hyperdrive as a kind of a hyperspace knife to cut through anything in its way, the fans were saying, well, what's the point of making a run on the Death Star? What's the point? What's the point of Poe Dameron doing all these dogfights? What's the point of them getting in the dogfights in Return of the Jedi? And why? If it turns out that you can do that, then nothing else makes sense. And this is the thing that's driving the fans crazy, is that the film was not just bad, it was so lazy that it undid the rules of the universe. You can't just go in there and change the rules of the universe like that. I have to stop for a second because Cody MacArthur Fett writes, here's some, I'm just looking at them, Bastilla Shan, Karth Onasi, Jolie Bindo, Mission Vow, Zalbar, M4, HK47. I don't know whether those are real names or not. It wouldn't surprise me, but that's also lazy, I think. The whole thing is, you have to wonder if it's intentional. To some degree, without question, the politics are intentional. And there's no question that Kathleen Kennedy and that director sat there and just, over how they were going to make a really different kind of Star Wars. But I don't think, it's hard for me to imagine that either one of them understood how much damage they were doing to the cash cow, to the pop culture cash cow. It's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in total revenue in terms of marketing and merchandise and stuff. And they basically drove a stake through it. And they did it in such a way that made the fans not just hate them, but hate what the film has become. It's like The Simpsons. I mean, I stopped The Simpsons between seasons 3 and 10, let's say, was just nonstop brilliant. Every single show just crazy good. And then they started getting a lot more spotty, and that show ended with the episode where Principal Skinner turns out not to be Principal Skinner. That was the end of that show. It was another great example of lazy writing that just undermined the entire structure retroactively. A lot of fans of The Simpsons said, in fact, Harry Shearer said this. I think we've talked about this before. Harry Shearer does the voice of Principal Skinner, among others, said you can't disrespect the fans this way. You can't introduce a character and have people grow to love the guy over 10 years and then suddenly tell you that everything he is a fraud. It's just you can't do it, but they did it, and that was it. But anyway, for the last 15, 20 years now, 20 almost, certainly 15 years, the show is not just bad, it's unwatchably bad. Watching The Simpsons for the last 15 years or 20 years is like, it's like watching a favorite relative dying in a hospital. It's unbearable. It's unbearable. It's just unbearably bad. You'd have, Homer would say something and Moe would appear outside the window to deliver one line, no explanation, nothing, just Moe's line, and then he's gone. Lazy, 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 lazy. And there's no excuse for lazy writing. I did a pitch for the whole video game thing, and I was basically went in front of an audience, and I opened like this. I said, how many of you out there in the audience have ever been hypnotized? I mean, all the way hypnotized, so that you were receptive to hypnotic suggestions and stuff. And I think 2 people in the crowd of 80 said they'd been hypnotized. And I said, well, I'm sorry to be the guy to inform you of this, but you've all been hypnotized. And you've all been hypnotized many, many times, thousands of times. Furthermore, you've paid people to hypnotize you. And furthermore, you've paid people to hypnotize you with values that are pretty much the antithesis of everything you believe in, because when you go to a movie, you're hypnotized. You're, without question, you're hypnotized. You sit there for 2 hours, completely immobile, staring at this world that you're in. And Jeremy pointed out, and it's just worth, saying again and again and again. You can be in there on a Saturday afternoon with popcorn in your lap and a drink, and you got your girl next to you, and you're watching the matinee of the latest slasher movie, and the guy jumps out of the dark when the knife flashes, and you leap out of your chair, and you know that you're not in that room, and you know that there are no such thing as horror slashers. You know all of this. It doesn't matter. You buy it because your defenses are down. You put your defenses down on purpose. It's the willful suspension of disbelief. I'm going to give myself over to this experience, and if I can shut my consciousness down and let that hypnosis take effect, then essentially, I can hypnotize myself into being in the movie, which is what the goal is, and that's also why the worst thing you can do. Well, it's a great example, actually, Cameron. The bombs. The worst thing you can do is do something so lazy that you pull it. We say you get pulled out of the movie. This thing pulled me out of the movie. It's a great expression for what's going on. It basically is so offensive to your conscious mind, which is taking a break, and relaxing, enjoying the movie. Your subconscious mind is in complete control on these things. You're just soaking it up. It's going right to your brainstem, and then something so ridiculous happens that it essentially is like a smack on your face, and your consciousness comes back, and you're not in the movie anymore. Now I'm sitting in a theater looking at this. And, the classic example is there's this slasher film, and there's some 17-year-old, and she's in in her bra and panties, and she's, and all of her friends have been killed by a slasher, and she hears something, smashing sound down in the basement, and she decides, maybe I should take this rickety flashlight with the weak batteries and go down there and see what's going on. And just like, okay, I'm done. If that's the best you can do, I'm out. There's no way anybody would do that. No way, anyway, under any circumstances. And so I'm out of the movie now. And you can get me back in the movie, but once you've done that, you've really screwed the pooch. There's really no excuse for it. It really is amazing how much an audience brings to the theater. I mean, they're really bringing an awful lot. And as one of these writing teachers pointed out, a book was called Story, I think. He said, not only do they bring this suspension of disbelief and a willingness to ride on this train with you, no matter how silly it may be, he says they're also incredibly smart, because their subconscious minds, our subconscious minds, while we're watching movies, are working on the problem. Who done it? In a murder mystery, who done it? And can you see it coming? And are you preparing for the twist? That's why it's so hard to write a murder mystery these days. Everybody knows there's going to be a twist, so now I guess the only twist is to not have a twist. But in any event, as this author points out, a bad movie writer, bad screenplay writer, will spend months, if not years, writing a screenplay that an audience member subconsciously decodes in 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's the secretary, not the secretary, the guy next to her, the guy who's super friendly at the water cooler. He's the guy who did it, and that's what we do. We just watch it and decode it and stuff. But the point is, your defenses are down, and you put them down intentionally. Screens are down, shields are down, and all of that message comes in. We soak it up, just soak it up. It's a great experience. Natasha and I are going to see a movie right after this, as a matter of fact. I'm going to go see Bohemian Rhapsody, which looks very, very good. Because they went to the trouble, speaking of lazy, I've not seen the movie, but based on the trailer, they've gone to the trouble to make this actor look enough like and sound enough like, and the scenes at Wembley and so on, all of them together took a lot of effort to convince you that this is in fact exactly how you remember it. And you therefore have a memory of seeing the real Freddie Mercury, and all of the props and all of the costumes and everything's exactly the way you remember it, and you just put this guy into the movie, and when you're watching the movie, it's hard to remember what Freddie Mercury really looked like because they spent so much trouble. Steve Darrow says the cups on the piano are positioned exactly the way they were in the real movies. These are concert footage. This is the difference between good filmmaking and bad filmmaking. Good filmmakers sweat every single detail, and bad filmmakers say, well, just drop bombs. Yeah, bombs don't really fall through space. Those idiots, they'll never get it. It's laziness, and it's a lack of respect for the audience. It's an even greater sin. It's just lack of respect for the audience, and boom. So there you go. Let's see, moving on. Japheth Dennis. Hello, Japheth. Says, hey, Bill, listener, since Stratosphere Lounge 001 here. Well, my friend, bless you. And all of those rest of you who've been here from the beginning. I don't know if 30 people saw that first show, but that's very, very flattering and very good to see you there. And it's good to be doing this and still be vertical after all these years, these many years. I want to say started in maybe 12 or something like that, 2012, somewhere around there, 11, 12. So, it's getting to be a while, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. Anyway, let's see what he has to say. Japheth says, don't get to watch live hardly ever, but I've always really enjoyed the show. Thank you. What do you think of this line as a comeback reply to being called a fascist right-winger? Hey, the only real difference between fascism and communism is that fascism believes in borders, and the only difference between communism and socialism is that communism confiscates all your wealth and puts your neck in a noose at the point of a gun, and socialism just does it at the point of a pen. That's pretty much the entire argument. Japheth, it's a little short of snappy, though. When people make the Nazis and the communists were completely different. No, they were exactly the same. Nazis were racial socialists and communists were class socialists. You have to have an enemy, and that enemy has to be responsible for all the trouble. And you have to have your 2-minute hate, and everything's got to be blamed on Goldstein, right? You got to have a Trotsky to blame the failures on. So they're no different. And great thing to tell people is that fascism comes from the Italian word fascisti, which means a bundle of sticks. It was the symbol that the fascists use on the Italian aircraft and so on. You'll see the bundle of sticks, the fascisti, and a bundle of sticks is collectivism. It means all of us together are stronger than any one of us individually, which is certainly true on some level, but as an ideology, it tends to subsume the individual, and then individual people with real lives and real families and actual honest-to-God emotions and histories and passions and foibles just become numbers in a game that's reached 150 million people now, something like that. Gone. Just as real as you and me. Gone. Because they haven't done it right yet. But anyway, so much for that. It's the argument, though, Japheth. It really is. It's that the fact that they're still talking about this seriously. In order to have socialism, you need one thing. It's helpful if you're an idiot, but it's not absolutely required. The one thing that is required is you have to lose any memory of the past. You cannot remember anything, because especially as it spins into this social justice warrior movement, the ability to remember things is fatal to this whole left-wing cause. It's fatal to remember that it was the Republicans that freed the slaves. It's fatal to remember that all of the racists with the fire hoses in the mid-'60s, hosing down black college students, we're all Democrats. You can't remember things like that. You can't remember LBJ saying, I'm going to have these N-words eating out of my hand voting Democrat for 200 years. You can't remember any of these things. You got to forget them and let them go. And you got to let all the failures go. And you add Venezuela to the mix, and it's like, well, they didn't do it right either. And so it's a philosophy that requires you to have absolute faith and zero willingness to look at evidence. And I find it exceedingly ironic that the people who are the most active socialists are the ones who most condemn religious people. It's so stupid. You believe in this thing. There's no such thing as God. And so when we have our earthly paradise, then I'll show you. Oh, really? Well, anyway, you get the idea. All right, so moving on here. Let's see. Jake Sorticus, also a top fan. That's excellent. Hey, Jake, how are you? Recently, I found out that the psychologist of a child under 10 who I work with I found out that the psychologist of a child under 10 whom I work with had introduced to her the idea of gender transition, showing her pictures of transgender people unprompted by the child and without parental permission. The child has struggled with psychological issues, including her gender identity, due to social acceptance. Based on my time in graduate school, I'm sad to report that many in the field do not share my horror at this. Is psychology lost to leftism? If so, how can we provide for the mental health needs of those who don't want their mental health indoctrinated with leftism? P.S. I told the parents and the child was immediately removed from therapy. Bless you, Jake. You probably saved somebody's life. You certainly saved their happiness. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the motive. So why would the psychologist do this? Well, the psychologist is ready to ruin this kid's life, and the only payoff for that would be for the psychologist to feel very, very, very morally advanced. In other words, there have been children throughout history who clearly identify with the other genders, no question about this. And there's no question that there are some microscopic percentage of the, when I say microscopic, I mean less than 1%, I think, of the population does find themselves living in a situation where they feel like they're living in the body of a person of a different sex. And that's a legitimate issue, a legitimate concern. And because those people were treated harshly for so long, or just outright either ignored or told to stuff it, the left winger thinks that we're going to achieve, moral nirvana by righting this terrible wrong, by making sure that every single child, that not a single child is put through this horrible, horrible, horrible thing ever again, and who but them to lead this this charge of fairness and righteousness and so on. It's just. It's just plain jerking off is what it is. I mean, you're essentially, you get somebody like that, and what they're basically doing is they are pleasuring themselves, actively pleasuring themselves, and they're the heroes in their movie. They're the heroes that when the story of this psychologist's life will be told, undoubtedly it'll be Meryl Streep, and this will be the moment when people will really realize what an astonishingly morally clear and good person this is. Was the part where they went into this perfectly normal and healthy little girl, or actually if she's in treatment, maybe she's got some emotional issues, and then went in there and opened the door to show her that all of her problems have to do with the fact that she's unclear about her gender, but fortunately there are progressive people like her, although they're one in a million. Bless them, because they're the only light in the darkness, and then the lights come up and everybody cheers and applauds, and she tearfully accepts the Oscar. And that's how they see themselves. Now, there's certainly phases and there's certainly times in kids. Look, this whole thing about gender identity in kids, look, I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself here and maybe a few 100 million of you. But, until I was 13, 14, 12, something like that, the idea of gender didn't occur to me. Sexuality didn't occur to me. Girls were horrible, and I hated them, and I didn't like being around them, and that's what seemed to be going on. I wasn't thinking about whether I was sexually attracted to men or women, because I wasn't thinking sexually about anything because I was a kid. And it was a benefit of the time that we grew up in, and a benefit of pretty much any time in history, with the exception of these lunatics now that have infested everything with their philosophy and their politics. But one of the luxuries about growing up prior to the progressive era is that you didn't have to worry about whether or not you identified as a male or a female when you're 5, because you didn't naturally identify in any of those things. It just wasn't on the table for you. It just wasn't. And so now it has become like abortion. It's become the standard. It's like you can't be, as far as the progressives are concerned, the only real woman, and I'm saying here's how progressives view the world. This certainly seems to be my indication. I'm not making a value judgment on the decision, but the progressive movement says that the only way you can be an actual woman is that you be not only willing to have an abortion, but actually celebrate it. Just, celebrate it. Get out there and have an abortion party. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not really a woman. And if that's the definition now of womanhood, then this society doesn't have long to last. And I think everybody knows that. Fortunately, it's not the definition that many of us hold. And so what you've got with that psychologist, Jake, is a person who is just desperate to be the hero in the movie of their own life and lives this movie there. I mean, honestly, I've seen it. And if you watch it actually happening in real time, you can see it too. You watch some of these so-called social justice warriors that show up at some of my events, but especially you watch them at like Ben Shapiro or Milo. You remember Milo, don't you? You watch them at one of those events, and watch carefully when Ben is taking questions, for example, from these students. Watch them in line and watch the person behind the person doing the talking. And what they're doing, and I've seen this so many times, is what they're doing is they're not coming at you with a question. They're coming at you with a statement that is elicited, that is designed specifically to elicit applause for them. And I remember the one I remember most clearly was, I said, are you telling me that that a guy who's a brain surgeon should get paid the same amount as the guy who's a clerk at 7-Eleven, and this guy's done nothing but study his entire life away while the clerk was out there smoking dope? He's out there smoking dope now. Are you telling me that these people should be compensated the same? Some stoner who's lying on his couch all day playing video games or watching The Price is Right should get the same compensation as a person who spends basically 20 hours a day in terms of study and practice and reaching that level of skill? You're telling me that's fair? And then one of these little angels got up and said, well, maybe the 7-Eleven clerk is black and doesn't get to be a brain surgeon because of the racism in the society, and brought the house down. They're just applauding and cheering and applauding and cheering and cheering and cheering and cheering and cheering. This is one of those moments where I realize sometimes it's just, I don't know where this stuff comes from. So I said, no, keep applauding, get it out of your system, keep going, because I got a few things to say about this, and laugh while you can, monkey boys. So after she got this gigantic cheer, I basically said to her, the greatest brain surgeon that I'm aware of, certainly one of the greatest in the world, if not the greatest in the world, the greatest brain surgeon in the world was raised as a dirt poor black man. He's black, although you'd never know it by talking to him because that's not his identity. His identity is a brain surgeon. But Ben Carson is probably the most skilled surgeon on the face of the planet. And he grew up dirt poor. He grew up in the South, and he grew up facing racism, and he managed somehow to become the world's best brain surgeon and inspired thousands of other people to become brain surgeons, and thousands of other people in minority situations who may have been told all their lives by idiots like you, this is me talking to this girl, that you're being held back because of your skin color. Well, Ben Carson, turns out, is a dirt poor black man just like you described. And instead of him being kept out of the brain surgery business by the institutional racism in this horrible, horrible Nazi society of ours, it turns out that his attitude was stronger than any racism that you can put down, real or imagine. And I have a lot more respect for him than I have for you. Then it got a little more quiet. Because, I kicked her right where she's sore. Right smack dab in the moral superiority. It's the only way to argue with these people. Find out when you hear a question or a statement or something like that, immediately look for what part of this statement is designed to make them look better than you. And once you find that, attack that and only that, and then it's all over. It's all over. But so telling a child under 10 that her problems are due to not having a full buffet of choices of the 198 different genders available to her is as stupid as listening to progressives with, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old having a temper tantrum at Toys R Us and just literally on the floor screaming and kicking and knocking things over. And they just, and they bend down and they say, now listen, Erasmus, Erasmus, we've talked about this. This is not, you're supposed to, just talking to this 2-3-year-old like it's an adult, and it's not an adult. And the reason that liberals talk to children like they're adults is because liberals are children. They don't want to be parents. They don't have the capability of it. I really maintain this. I think that these progressive parents who are absolutely determined that the most important thing in the world is to maintain a good friendship, solid friendship with your kids. We're pals. Hey, buddy, how's it going? I've never, ever, 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 ever seen a happy kid in that situation. I remember this kid on this airplane was screaming at the top of his lungs, taxiing out. I mean, at the top of his lungs. 6-year-old kid, way old enough to know, better, and screaming at the top of his lungs about things. And then I can hear Groovy Dad right next to him going, "Hey, buddy, come on now, buddy. Hey, buddy. Hey, what's that, buddy? Is that an ambulance? What do you think that is? See that over there, buddy?" And that's not how I would have been spoken to, and it's not how I would have spoken to my 6-year-old, because my 6-year-old wouldn't be doing that if I had a 6-year-old. Because conversation I would have in a situation like that started long before I started screaming, but somewhere along the line I would have gotten you're going to behave yourself or you're going to regret it. And if I continued to do that, then guess what? I would regret it. So they're determined to be, the best way to be a parent is to be your child's best friend. Bull. Nonsense. It's the antithesis of that. People who determine that they have to be their best friend to their kids are people who don't have the courage to be parents. And that means that you have to have the courage to have them hate you, because it's your job to draw the line and prevent them from getting certain things that they want. And if you're not ready to endure a little temporary hate, then by all means, continue to treat them like your best friends. And instead of a little temporary hate that is going to last for an hour or two, you're going to be hated for the rest of your life by this child who will never grow up because they never, ever, ever were taught how to behave. They were never taught what boundaries are. They were never taught what no means. Every single time they had an emotional tantrum, they were rewarded for it. And so if you don't want to do the half an hour or the hour of I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, then if you don't have the courage for that, that's fine. You're going to get the I hate you, but you're going to get it from adult children, and it's going to last for 35 or 40 years until you finally depart this veil of tears, and you're only going to hear a tenth of it. Your kid's psychologist is going to hear most of it. So not so tough, really. Not so tough. If you don't have the strength to if you don't have the strength to stop your child from doing something that you know is bad for it because you don't want to be unpopular, you're in the wrong line of work. And the evidence just is everywhere. I look at kids who are raised in very conservative families. I look at kids who are raised, and when I say conservative families, I mean I'm talking about kids that are raised in families where the girls all wear, like dresses and never see movies, never see TV, very, very strict Mormon family and so on. And I've never ever seen happier children than them. They just love to hang out with each other and just sit around, and they'll play musical instruments. Their best idea of a good time is to hang out with their brothers and sisters and their mom and their dad. And they are as happy as I've ever seen anybody in my life. I envy them enormously. And meanwhile, in the next state south of there, you've got people whose attitude is, oh, no, I should give Erasmus and Lilith, they should get everything. They should never be scolded by me. It scars them to have an adult yelling and screaming at them. Heaven forbid you should ever hit them. You're an idiot. So there you go. And you'll pay. Michael Wilson. Well, it looks like the most votes with 12 votes here. We have to get a little earlier tonight because we got to get some dinner before the movie, which is at 9 o'clock, honey. So Michael Wilson says, hey, Bill, happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Michael, and to all of the rest of you out there, and men and women and all the ships at sea. There was a case in Maryland where a man who was a legal gun owner was killed in his home by police for resisting gun confiscation due to someone reporting him as a threat. Why is it that no one seems to be talking about things like this happening, and what should people do when the cops come for their guns? Well, let's just preface this, Michael, by me saying that I don't know anything about this story, and so I'm going to be working under the assumption that what you said is factually correct. I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying sometimes different things come out. Well, we did that story about this security guy who was killed by cops after subduing the shooter. Which seemed virtually unjustifiable to me. Later on, you hear reports from people saying that the cops many times said, put the gun down, and he didn't. I don't know. But in this particular situation, assuming that it's correct, there's good news and bad news here. And I'm talking about like from orbit. I'm not talking about this individual situation. That's a catastrophe. It's just a crime and so on. It's just not. I tend to have more sympathy for the police officers than I do. Although in this particular case, it's not a whole lot of sympathy. But it's the person who issued the warrant. It's the person who said you're going to go to this guy's house and those are the people that in cold blood make these decisions, as opposed to police officers who have to be making split-second decisions and so on. So I don't know anything about the details of that, but there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is that as long as people do things, as long as the state does this piecemeal, one person at a time, they never activate the. All right, it's game on time. As long as it's individuals and it's happening relatively infrequently, they never activate that nationwide kind of, all right, this is it. This is why we have the guns. Here we go. So the bad news is that whole kind of boiling the frog kind of thing. But I can tell you in all certainty, and I mean this, and you can make of it what you want and criticize me as much as you want to, but needless to say, if I'm sitting in my house, and somebody said it was at 5 o'clock in the morning, if I'm sitting in my house or sleeping in my house with my beautiful wife and there's a pounding on the door and somebody says, police department, open up, I will glance out, and if they're holding up a badge, I'll open the door. And if that guy says, we're here to take your AR-15, I will say, here you go. Because that is some kind of misunderstanding. And I know that if this is happening all across the state, then it's just, but it's not, right? So I don't know what to tell you. The bad news is that as long as they do things, one by one, you're probably smarter to go along with the police and say and assume that it's some kind of error, or more likely, I guess in this case, somebody's decided to call SWAT, and the death by SWAT is happening more and more often. You call the police department and you say there's an active shooter in this house, and I've seen him, with his rifles. The police go in there and they have to act on that, and then off you go. Karsten M has a question. It looks no bill that is confiscating of your property without due process. I agree, Karsten, and this is why, if I get a bang 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 on the door, if it's a criminal, that's a different story. If it's a police with warrant, I'm going to let him in. And my reason for doing this is that I know I haven't committed any crimes. This is some kind of misunderstanding, intentional or otherwise. And yes, they are confiscating my property without due process, and that is something we will solve in court and not in the morgue. So if you look at the reality of it, the actual gun confiscation and these kind of death by SWAT teams is exceedingly rare in this country, and that's the good news. The bad news is, as long as they do it piecemeal, there's not going to be this uprising. The good news is that if you think about the number of people with weapons and the number of times this happens, it's such a microscopic number of times that it's not a threat to the republic. That's how I look about it. I look at Carson, I understand all this. You've got a great point, and I'm with you about the warrants. I'm with you about property. I'm with you about all of that. But if a policeman pulls a gun on me and says, "Open the door," I'm not going to run to my AR-15 and shoot it out with him because I have an opinion about the legality of his order. I'm just not going to do it. That is not what the courage of the situation would demand. The courage of the situation would be determined by, okay, we are getting reports that all across the country, federal agents are moving in the millions and they're just confiscating people's guns at the order of the Congress. Now, that case, something like that, now it's time to sit out there on the roof with your rifle and say, "Officer, I really don't want to have to do this if I have to. I really don't." And so, but see, this is why the situations. This is why I gave you the answer I gave you, because if that balloon never did drop, or if the balloon never went up, if the other shoe dropped, and that giant nationwide simultaneous gun confiscation thing was going on, then there wouldn't be enough policemen to do it. Not only wouldn't there be enough to survive it, but there wouldn't. Most policemen just plain wouldn't obey that order. So what you end up with is a number of isolated cases like this, which are, and when I say they're tragic, it's not me being flippant. It's not me just tossing it off. It's a catastrophe. A guy is standing up for his rights. He's fighting against this illegal government intrusion into his house and his life. I assume that there were no other issues. I assume that he didn't have any warrants out or any felony violations. I assume he had no rap sheet, and I'm going to assume further that he wasn't in any weapons violations laws. But if he's dead now, because he made his stand on this, then the stand is to protect the people from the government. And if you see that the government is coming after the people, not just you, the people, all of them, if it's just you, then chances are pretty good it's a misunderstanding. And at the very, 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 very least, you've got a case to start. I'm not trying to be flip about this. I'm genuinely not. But I mean, if they confiscate your weapons illegally and they continue on, you can make a federal case out of it. And you could probably start a GoFundMe campaign and get another 300 AR-15s, and I would definitely do that, and I'd distribute them to children once they convinced me that they were old enough to be responsible with firearms. But this is the thing. When this is a great question, by the way, it's a great question. Because on some level, I'm contradicting everything that I've ever said. But see, this is not a contradiction so much as it's just a case of understanding the individual circumstances. The reason that I have weapons is not in case I have to shoot government officials, because I don't want to do that. The reason I have the weapons is so that the government officials will not be motivated to come and take the weapons in the first place, you see? How do you not love this? Cthulhu twitches. Yeah, great. Here's what he would say. He says, here's my AR-15, officer. Would you also like the map to the landmines? Perfect. So in answer to what we do about this civilizationally is, I've often said we are way behind on this lawfare business. I don't like the idea of using courts and lawsuits, but if that's what being used against us continuously, then we'll take the sword out of their hands and we'll use it on them. The people that again, I'm going to assume, I have to assume, that this guy is completely innocent, that there's no cause whatsoever for this, that they just simply barged into his house and said, we're here to take your guns. I find that hard to believe, but these things do happen. If that were the case, then I would have simply surrendered my guns, because I realize this is not what I have the guns to protect me from. This is not a nationwide fascist takeover. This is a single arrest of somebody, and probably set up by somebody that doesn't like me very much. Now, this is not the same thing as a criminal, by the way, because if I decide to resist the police, I'm going down. And the law, if I decide to resist a criminal, the law is on my side, and I don't expect a criminal to be rational. In other words, if a criminal comes into my room, and I say, well, you can take the stuff too, I'm making the same decision. No, I'm not going to get in a shootout over the police because they're after me with a warrant that maybe I don't deserve or didn't earn. That's different, because if turns out they did do it in error, I get my stuff back. I'm still alive. I get, at the very least, an apology and probably get a check on top of it. And furthermore, you get to rub their noses in it. But if a criminal comes in and takes my stuff or decides to hurt me or my wife, you don't recover that. It doesn't, the government doesn't turn it back to you. So, the reason I like this question so much is because it goes to the question of reason and rationality, and where is the balance? Where's the balance in the actual real world? I suppose that one extension of the argument for saying, no, he did the right thing, is to say that if you're convinced you haven't committed any crimes, you might as well just shoot through the door, right? If the police are coming, just shoot them through the door with a shotgun. Why wait for them to come inside? If you're convinced that's what's going on. So here's a much better question. Bob Neef says, what if California passes a law that says you have to turn in your AR-15? If California passes a law that says I have to turn in my AR-15, I'll have a long conversation with my wife. And I will say, honey, there's some other lovely neighborhoods in the country as well. I would say that the whole California experience is a slippery slope. It's a constant degradation from being the most vibrant economy and the most inventive economy to becoming a third world nation run by crooks and thieves. And I would make the case to say this whole thing is a slow slide, but this is a line. It's a line, and that's a line where we better just say, I think this is where we probably need to get out, honey. Because if that's the case, this is not only not a free state anymore. Before, the lack of freedom was something that was annoying to me because I wasn't breaking any laws, but now they're actively intruding upon our lives to take away this fundamental freedom. And if we just sit still for this, then we deserve what we get. So that's what I would do. Now, Cthulhu Twitcher says, Bill, you should have your wife do more videos with you. She's a babe, and that means more viewers. I couldn't agree more, honey. I've been asking you, please, baby, please, baby. Can you do the next one here with me? We'll do them together. They can ask you all kinds of personal questions about me. You can say all of the wonderful, flattering things that you say to me all the time, and it's your big chance to tell everybody that I don't have any negative characteristics whatsoever. It's finally a chance for you to, to kind of, just sort of, I don't want to say pay me back for my awesomeness. I'm just kind of saying, just kind of let people in on, the inside scoop on just how wonderful it must be for you. So for some reason she's not biting at that. We'll see why. Okay, so apparently a lot of people in the comment section now are screaming RK, RK, RK. So we have to do some RK. So here's what I'm going to do. I have not looked at the next question. I just had this idea fly into my head. I have no idea what the next question is. That's the honest truth. But I am going to address the next question, whatever it may be, through the lenses of RK. And if it's a question about what my favorite toy in Christmas was, then I'll find a way to do that through RK. So spinning the giant wheel of probability, we find, here we go. Daryl Green, how many congressmen and senators do you think are actually good people of principle rather than compromisers who go with the way the wind is blowing to stay in office? Well, as it turns out, Daryl, there are two different kinds of people. There are R-type people and there are K-type people. And it's based upon the fact that human beings are far and away the most adaptable, malleable is a better word, species that has ever lived on this earth. And you can get some vague idea of how much we are able to adapt to situations when you realize that I believe that we are the only species on the world, or certainly the only species in the world that I'm aware of, that eats everything. Now just think about that for a second. There are carnivores and there are tigers and they eat living meat. There are scavengers that only eat dead meat. There are insectivores that eat insects. There are herbivores that eat plants. But we eat everything. There's nothing on the earth that we don't eat. You cannot give me a list of anything that has any kind of nutrition in it at all, something biological that we do not eat. We eat roots, we eat leaves, we eat insects, we eat birds, we eat mammals, we eat reptiles, we eat everything. We eat everything. And the fact that humans eat everything is a big part of their success. I just had an incredible idea of something I'm going to close this thing up with because I wanted to talk about this, and I keep forgetting, and so I'm terribly sorry, but it's a beautiful rant, and I'll get into it for you. It's completely about something different, but I just think it's really cool, and I think it's cool because it just goes on and on and on. So give me 1 second to make a note for myself. There I go. Okay, so back to the congressman thing. We're as adaptable as people can be because we eat anything. And Eric says we eat anything that moves. Well, we eat things that don't move too. We eat moss. We eat everything. So understanding that we eat everything, I don't personally, but as part of my species, we eat everything. I'm not aware of anything biological that we don't eat. We eat rocks and gold even. So because we are that adaptable, we are also that psychologically adaptable. In other words, if the human body is built in such a way that we will live in a place where we have nothing to eat but walrus blubber, or nothing to eat but dried roots, and there are examples of both of these on the earth, then you've got to understand that in order for us to function in those environments, because we can function in any environment, we have enough intelligence to be able to make any part of planet Earth livable because we eat anything. And we've got the fundamental brains to build shelters and clothing and so on. So with that much adaptability, there's got to be a fair amount of psychological flexibility as well. And as it turns out, human beings, unusual as they are in so many ways, primarily, as I say, just visibly in terms of how much variety we have in terms of what we eat, turns out that humans, I believe, have the ability to selectively choose, as I'm talking about as a species now, selectively choose a reproductive strategy based on the environment, based on the situation. And basically, the way to understand that is like this. There are two different kinds of reproductive strategies. And when I say a strategy, I'm talking about the ability of a species to reproduce itself. From an evolutionary point of view, that's success. Anything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if all the males march off a cliff. Doesn't matter if all the females, bite off their heads. Doesn't matter. The question is, do we make more of them? If the answer is yes, then it's a win for that species. If the answer is no, then you're off the table pretty damn fast. So there are different species that are not as flexible as we are. None of them are as flexible as we are. And so they are locked into these choices, but we have the ability to jump back and forth between them. And the two different choices are different ends of a spectrum, and I'm going to go to the extreme ends of the spectrum in order to demonstrate the difference as clearly as possible. In point of fact, most species are pretty much on one side, pretty much on the other. There's a little bit of gray there, but let's just take two great examples. So, one strategy for making more of yourself is called the R strategy. It's based on reproduction. And what it is basically saying, there's a theory, and the theory is, it's not a theory, it's a formula. And the formula says, given any area, how many organisms can it sustain? Well, it's the reproductive rate times, or rather limited by the actual area and the amount of food available. It's basically cutting some corners, but that's basically it. In other words, how much food is available in this 100 square acres, and that is going to determine how many of these animals are going to be able to reproduce. So if it turns out that food is abundant, then the strategy that makes sense is to go with the high reproductive rate. And a classic example of an animal with a high reproductive rate is a rabbit. Rabbits, as you probably know, they mate like rabbits. And the rabbit the species of rabbit has gone that way because it is very successful for the rabbit. Rabbits, I'm not talking about hares now, I'm just talking about most of your garden variety rabbits, succeed because there is an ample food supply wherever they may be. And so since there's enough food for everybody, there's no reason to build a better rabbit. In other words, if you what would be the point of a rabbit and Mrs. Rabbit having, instead of 10 kids, they have 2. And instead of having 10 kids twice or 3 times a year, they have 2 kids every 5 years. Why would you do that? Well, because we're going to build a better rabbit, and we're going to train the rabbit, and we're going to show the rabbit where how to be a rabbit, and we're going to teach it how to avoid predators, and we're going to show it where the food is and stuff. But it's a waste of time because there's enough food there for rabbits just to. You don't need a better rabbit. It's a waste of time to build a better rabbit when there's so much food around that even these fundamental model, basic model rabbits are doing just fine. The smart play is to build as many rabbits as you possibly can, because building a better rabbit doesn't help you. It doesn't help you. You could train a rabbit for 15 years and have the parents spend all of that time and stuff on it, but it doesn't matter because the rabbit is not competing against other rabbits. And it's not competing against other rabbits because there's plenty of food. And because there's plenty of food and because they're not competing against other rabbits, a number of things happen for rabbits. Most clearly of which you can probably say is like this. If I'm a rabbit and I'm on an infinite plain of clover, let's say, it's just an open field of clover in all directions, and I'm waking up in my rabbit morning and I go out there and put on my little rabbit hat and get on the rabbit bus and I go to this field of clover and I start eating, if other rabbits come in and start to push against me, then all I have to do is hop a little bit to one side and there's all the food I need. So rabbits don't compete against other rabbits. Rabbits don't have mating hierarchies. Rabbits do not have territory, because since there's enough food for everybody, you just simply move. No big, and I don't mean move to the next county. I mean just move over. So when you've got our strategy type species, you find a certain number of characteristics. You find that they do not invest heavily in their children. That they basically let their children go as early as possible. They have no problem with early childhood sexuality. In fact, they think the earlier that the children are having sex, the better, because that's the fastest way to make more rabbits. And they don't perceive outside threats. They're very, very poor at perceiving a threat, especially from its own species, because they're not wired that way. There's no reason for them to have those traits. So opposite the rabbits, the rabbits are the R strategy. On the other end is the K strategy. So let's imagine now, instead of rabbits in an enormous field of clover, let's imagine a pack of wolves up in the mountains in wintertime. Now, when you've got a pack of wolves in the mountains in wintertime, you can try the R strategy, which means you could try as a wolf. I'm speaking theoretically, needless to say. But if you had a bunch of wolves up in the mountains, say 10 of them in a pack, in a territory, why don't the wolves just have 10 wolves each? Why doesn't the wolf have 10 puppies twice a year? That would make more wolves, right? No, it would not, because there's not enough food for 10 wolves. There's barely enough food for the wolves you have. And since the food is very limited up there in the mountains in the wintertime, the people who are going to get the food are the people that are going to reproduce. That's the strategy. That's the reason something's working out. It's not a design. It's not like here. It's the result of trial and error. There probably were some ancestors of the wolf species who decided to have many, many wolves, and they're not here anymore because those wolves were not good enough to survive. So wolves have the opposite problem than rabbits. Wolves have a very limited food supply. And since wolves are dealing with a limited food supply, now all of a sudden, competition with other wolves is not only on the table, but it's life and death. It is life and death importance. So when you have a species that is dealing with restricted food supply, like wolves in the winter in the mountains, all of your former advantages now become disadvantages, and you have to deal with the problem in an entirely different way. And the way you deal with that problem is you build better wolves. You have to build better wolves. And that means you have to invest a great deal of time in your children. You don't have many children. You have just a few puppies. And the weakest ones, the runts, they die off. It's cruel, but there it is. These are the rules. You don't get to cry about it because they're the rules. So now you've got a situation where the only way that your offspring are going to survive and be successful as a species is for them to know how to get the maximum amount of food out of a low food situation. And that means they have to learn things. You have to teach wolves how to hunt. You have to teach wolves how to hunt in packs. The fact that you have a pack means there's social structure, there's social hierarchy. There's the alpha dog, there's the alpha female. Then there's all the different pecking order, all the way down to the omega dog, and they all know where they belong relative to each other. And there's constant struggles of strength to see who goes where, and they've got hierarchy, and they've got order, and they've got law. And most importantly, I think they have inhibitions on their behavior to prevent the competition from wiping them out. And what I mean by that is you'll have two wolves that are going to get into a fight, and I mean a vicious fight over who's the dominant wolf. And usually it'll be the two biggest, strongest wolves because they have some sense of how big they are, and the most aggressive wolves. So these two wolves are going to go at it against each other, and they're going to bite and chew and mess each other up. But eventually, almost without exception, the weaker wolf is going to realize that he's lost this fight. And instead of running away, what they'll do in a case of very social animals like wolves, very K animals, is that the wolf who's losing will suddenly stop fighting, and he'll basically bare his throat. He'll kind of go down on his side and bare his throat. And what he's basically saying to the other wolf is, you win, you can tear my throat out if you want to. And this is what I find so fascinating. Once the dominant wolf sees that the other wolf has surrendered, he doesn't have to go cool down. It's not like the other wolves have to pull him off and take him for a walk for 20 minutes, because he's going to go back there and kick that guy's ass. No, the instant that one wolf shows submission and concedes the fight, the aggression in the victor is just turned off. It's gone. It's gone immediately. And it's built into the species that it be gone. Because if it wasn't just gone, then you're going to have wolves going out of existence because they're killing each other. The best of the species are killing each other. So you have to find a way to make it so that the strongest ones do most of the mating, because that's the most biologically fit males. But at the same time, you don't want to kill off the entire pack trying to figure out who the top dog is. So these things are very clear. But what it means is, when you have a K-type society like wolves, you have things like codes, you have honor, you have discipline, you have a very, very developed sense of other. Because unlike a rabbit, if another pack of wolves comes into that territory, it's not like the wolves can just say, hey, welcome aboard. We'll just move over here and have some more of this food. No, there's not enough food for two packs. So they're going to fight it out, because only one pack is going to be able to live off of that land. So this is basically how it works in nature. And the really brilliant insight is that, and certainly not my insight, although I'm certainly becoming a champion of it, is that you can look at human behavior and see it as one of these two different strategies. You can find that politics, and you can find that individuals, you can find institutions, countries, all of it can be defined by the degree to which they become either R-based, low quality, large numbers, or K-based, small quantity, higher quality. And here's a great example of this. K-type species, and human beings are very strongly K, except under unusual circumstances, like the circumstances we're living in now. Very competitive species. And so we have all of these laws and rules and so on. And because we are generally competitors, natural competitors, competition doesn't frighten us that much. There's probably not a person watching this show, or at least watching all of them, all the way through, who wouldn't agree with me. I think pretty much everybody watching this is pretty K, and they would all agree with me when I say I would rather lose fairly than cheat to win. I have inhibitions against cheating to win that are built into my personality, because cheating is not in my best interest. Living among cheaters is not in my best interest. It's my best interest to play by the rules, because I'm a competitor, I can compete, and I'm going to learn from my failure instead of simply, crying about it and being triggered by it. So K-type humans have a strong sense of threat awareness. When they see things like people screaming Allahu Akbar and blowing up nightclubs, this gets our attention in a way that it does not get the attention of progressives. It doesn't viscerally alarm them, because they don't have these instincts. But the most important thing, and I will honest to God answer this question about the politicians, but the most important difference, I think, in human behavior is respect for rules that the K species has. The K species respects the rules, has to have rules, needs them built into us surviving. These are, when I say rules, I mean these are things like codes of honor and giving somebody your word and doing the right thing instead of the smart thing, and so on and so on and so on. So there are many humans like that, and you're among them, who feel strongly a sense of honor, and you feel like you're good people. It's not perfect people, but you try to be good people, and you live laws. You live life according to the law, and I bet you the audience of the show's criminal background is exceedingly lower than it is for any random YouTube channel out there. So all of this, so you're K-type people, and you believe in law and order and structure, and you can have freedom. That's why we have these laws, so that we can be wolves and go around and do whatever the hell we want to, as long as we don't mess up other wolves. And so we instinctively obey the laws, and we instinctively submit to laws that we perceive to be just, which is why we're in the trouble we're in, because we're up against other humans who have taken completely different strategy. And their strategy is that rules are for suckers. That people who obey the rules have a genetic defect, a genetic weakness that they have to take advantage of because they cannot compete. The rabbit cannot compete with the wolf, so the rabbit has to do things that the wolf would consider cheating, but the rabbit doesn't consider it cheating. How's he going to beat the wolf? So the progressives have essentially zero. I'll get to it, Bob. I'll get to it. Writing a question 15 times is not going to help me. I'll get to it. So this is the issue. We are now so prosperous. We have so much abundance. We have so much wealth and so much security that we live in a field of clover. And that the strategies that got us to make a field of clover, the strategies that created all of this in the first place, discipline, hard work, sexual discipline, late sexual onset, high degree of commitment to the children, high degree of education, and so on and so on and so on. All of these things built this thing, and now that it's built and is functioning according to plan, which is to produce endless fields of clover, now it doesn't make any sense to be disciplined and hardworking and honorable and refuse to take charity and all the other things that are built into conservative people. It doesn't make sense. Now, I'm talking about this from a non-judgmental point of view. I'm trying to get above the R's and the K's, and I'm saying, okay, well, now that there is this field of clover, why would you spend the time on children? In other words, why not just take everything? Why not just get on government subsidies? Why would you go to the trouble to work if you can live as well by not working? And that is the essence of the rabbit mentality. There's all the food that we want out there. Give me the food. And I don't play by rules. So there you go. So now we have two different kinds of people. We have people who play by the rules, and these tend to be competitors, and they tend to be people who are successful in competitions, people who understand that failure is a learning experience, not a perpetual denial. And then you have other people who, for whatever reason, they probably learned this in play. I think most play is designed to let people know where they fit in the scheme of things in terms of their ability to compete. But I would not call myself an astonishingly good athlete. I was the worst player on my Little League baseball team, without question, my first year. But I learned something from that first year, and I got better in the second year. And so even though I was not like this alpha athlete, for whatever reason, psychologically, losing didn't scare me. I didn't like it, but it didn't keep me from the game. But there's a lot of people that are not like that. So before I get to the politicians, I will just give you one classic example of how R-type humans behave in a K-type society. And the example is the cuttlefish. So here's how cuttlefish get down. The male cuttlefish, like any other competitive species, are getting into fights with each other, and they're trying to make themselves as big as possible. They got these incredible ability to change their colors, and they're flashing all these different patterns. And up here, 20 feet above the floor of the ocean, the cuttlefish are doing their mating battles and trying to see who's top cuttlefish. The females are down on the floor looking up at this awesome action, kind of like watching groupies at a rock concert. And they're trying to see which one of these males is the most male, and that guy's going to be the guy who gets lucky. Or guys. So you've got these males up here competing in strength and vibrancy and health in order to win the opportunity to go down and mate with the females who are only interested in the males that have got good genes. That makes sense. As it turns out, just through general random variation, some cuttlefish are not as big as strong. Some are bigger and stronger than the average cuttlefish. Some are weaker. And the weaker ones look at this battle of the male cuttlefish fighting each other and trying to puff themselves up and make themselves big, and understand on some level, some instinctual level, pre-wired level, that they can't compete, that they're too small, they're too weak to ever have a chance in that fair fight up there. So what these male cuttlefish actually genuinely do is, instead of making themselves bigger and trying to look intimidating, they make themselves smaller, and they bring their tentacles in, and they do all of the little things that make them look like females. And because they look like females, they go floating right through those males who would tear them up if they realized that it was a male. They act like females, and that allows them to get down to where the females are, and and that's how they get their mating opportunity. They cheat. They cheat. And we look at it as cheating, and we're repulsed by it. But if you're a tiny cuttlefish and you've got no chance to compete, what else option do you have? What else are you going to do? It's either this or lose. So they cheat. And all the rules that the other cuttlefish are obeying, the men and the women, these individual cuttlefish say, no, sorry, man, it's not, I'm not going to get lucky this way, so I'm going to have to do something different. So they cheat. And they have to cheat. That's the only chance they have. Now let's talk about members of Congress and how this applies to RK theory. Darrell Green says, how many congressmen and senators do you think are actually good people of principle rather than compromisers who go with the way the wind is blowing to stay in office? And my answer to this would be very, very few of them. The reason that the Democrats are so successful is because politics appeals to progressives. Politics is you can't have progressives without politics. The reason that progressives want politics in everything is because they understand that they can achieve things through coercion that they could never achieve through competition. Just that simple. So let's assume, for the sake of the argument, because it's pretty close to true, that everybody wants more or less the same things. They want nice cars. They want big fancy houses. They want to be famous. They want to be rich. They want all of these things that give them the opportunity to impress the members of the opposite sex or the same sex. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you get the idea. They all want to be big man on campus. Every single member of the society, every single human wants to be big man on campus. So where does that leave you in the real world? Leaves you with a group of people, and they don't have to be strong, by the way, they just have to be strong-willed. Leaves you with a group of people who say, all right, so here's the situation. I live in America. Here are the rules. If I work hard long enough, I'll succeed, and if I fail, I'll learn a lesson, and I'll go back and I'll try it again. So I'm going to take the K strategy because this is a free country, and it allows people to succeed or fail based on their own merit. And the other K-type person who says, I don't really feel like really need that much of a house, these people go on and become perfectly happy crossing guards or whatever the case may be. But they play by the rules, and they know that it's going to be dependent on how hard they compete. But there are humans out there, and we call these humans progressives, who cannot compete. They know they can't compete. They know it. They know that they don't have what it takes to run a business, to make a business. They don't have the guts to basically give up getting a check and start worrying about being responsible for writing a check. They don't have the courage for it or the patience. They're either too stupid or too lazy or both to be able to compete. They're the small little cuttlefish, and so they have to get their big man on campus stuff, but they can't do it through competition. They can't go out and work for it. They know they don't. They know they don't have it. So their only hope is this. If I'm going to be like Elon Musk, let's say, I know he's a controversial figure, but he's a good one for me. Elon Musk comes to this country. He realizes that there needs to be a way to change money, change hands electronically, because there's all kinds of purchasing going on out there. And so he invents PayPal. He takes the money that he invented PayPal with, and he took a big risk getting PayPal going and put all of his life, every single day, no time off, nothing, makes a ton of money, sells PayPal. Then he decides he wants to build a rocket company, so he goes and takes that risk. He wants to build an electric car company, and he takes that risk. And he wants to build a supersonic train, he takes that risk. It's all a risk. It's not just risking his money, it's his time, it's his energy, it's his name, it's everything. He is a competitor. So, he knows that the best way for him to be big man on campus is to be left alone, because he's going to go out and do what it takes to be big man on campus. Now, let's say that the guy who's living right down the street from him, or the next guy in line, let's say, in the immigration line, is a guy who doesn't have that kind of energy, doesn't have that kind of intelligence, doesn't have that kind of discipline, doesn't have that kind of drive. What is that guy going to do? Well, at the far end of the R extreme, when you get into actual progressives, you find that they go into the kind of careers where competition is not terribly important. If you're going to be a car dealer, you've got to hustle because there's another car dealer across the street. If you're going to be a sociology professor, you're not in terribly big danger of losing your job to superior sociology professors because, sorry to break it to you, but being a sociology professor is not really that hard. And you don't expect to have sociology professors become millionaires through their excellence because, as a general rule, it's relatively simple. Same thing for acting and writing and all the rest of the show business stuff that I've been involved with. I've been a theater major, and I've taken some of the classes needed to get into engineering. And if you want to know whether it's easier to be let me rephrase that. Whether it's easier to be a bad actor or a bad engineer, it is much easier to be a bad actor than it is to be a bad engineer. It's just easier. So if I want all of the big man on campus stuff, if I want the car and I want the reward and I want the house and I want the fame and I want all the rest of it, but I can't get it because I'm either too lazy or too stupid or both, then what do? Well, I realize that if I simply work hard and not that hard for a short period of time, if I just knock on doors and get seen with the right people and basically kiss the right butt and do all of these things, I can become either a bureaucrat or a politician. And when I'm a politician, then I don't have to run a business. I can simply write a law that allows me to take what that person who's done all the work has done. I'm just going to take it. I'm going to take it because I have political power. And because these chumps, these wolves, these K-idiots, because of their little code of honor, since I was elected according to their ridiculous, antiquated rules, since I was elected according to the rules, they're going to let me take their stuff because they are limited by their code of ethics and honor, which I don't have to obey. So I can just steal and steal and steal. And they'll look at me and go, "What's the matter with you? Don't you feel any shame about this?" And my response is, "What shame?" No. They look at all of the things that conservatives believe and they use them against us. And the most obvious example of this is they call us racist, and they call us racist because they want us to shut up. And it works. It works extremely well. The reason it works is because we're not racist. We don't want to be seen as racist. And so we simply, in order to protect our reputation, which they don't seem to care much about, we will do what they want to do. They'll force us to, they will use our own decency against us. This is how the left has succeeded in America. They've understood that they can use the decency of the American people and their appeal to fair play and fairness. They can use that in order to steal and get away with it. So when you hear that votes are being counted and recounted and recounted until finally the Democrat has enough votes to win, at which point all of the votes have been counted. And you hear there back during the Al Franken election that, it was a 50-50 election. The vote was down to a couple thousand votes. And hey, look, it's 3 days after the election, but we just found a box of votes. Really? Yeah, I guess somebody misplaced this box. Somebody must have misplaced the box at one of the counting printings. But look, here's a bunch of votes, and it's got people's names on it. Really? 100 votes in that box, huh? Yeah. Well, it's a 50-50 election. So how many of them are for Al Franken? All 100% of them are for Al Franken. Well, that's statistically, the chance of that being the case is so close to zero that it's zero. So that's cheating. We all know it. Why do we put up with it? We put up with it because it is going through a legal process of rules and laws, which we know is being violated, but nevertheless, it is still functioning according to what we have set up as the rules, so it doesn't activate us. Now, if it turned out that Al Franken and a bunch of his friends had decided to go down to Congress with rifles and shoot the guy who won the election and then simply place himself in there, then we would be We would be completely activated. We'd know he's broken the law. We know he's done all these immoral, dishonest things, and we'd go in there with our own rifles and we'd get him out of there and make sure he didn't come back. So see how it works? They get away with anything they want to as long as they understand how to make it impossible for us to react because of our behavioral inhibitions. The inhibitions that make us successful competitors are what they use to beat us. They cheat. And to us, cheating is anathema. I'd rather lose than cheat. I really would, and so would you. They hear a statement like that and they think you're absolutely out of your mind. They think you're nuts. So it behooves them, who can't compete in the free market, to use the coercive force of the law and get other Ks, by the way. We started talking earlier about this guy who was shot in his house. What happened there? Well, some R-type rabbit person decided for whatever reason that this guy, who's a K-type guy willing to defend himself, is a problem. So does he go out there himself? Does Mr. Rabbit guy go out there himself and take the guns away from this guy? No, of course not. He doesn't have the courage for that. He doesn't have the courage, doesn't have the skill, the competence, nothing. What our guy does is he convinces other K-type people, who we're going to call police in this particular case, he's going to convince them that the rules have been broken by this rogue individual. And like wolves, they'll understand that, okay, well, this wolf has broken the rules and the law, so therefore he sends wolves out to get the other wolf when the rabbit doesn't risk its life. Why would it? A rabbit, they don't do it. They don't need to. They can convince us to use physical force against ourselves because the people that are committing the acts of violence, in this case the police or the military, are wolves. But the rabbit has convinced the wolf that this is what the rules require, and wolves are wired that way, and that's how they do it. That's how they do it. So if you don't compete, if you're a person who needs to cheat, you want politics in everything. You want politics in everything. You don't just want politics in politics. You want politics in school. You want politics in the church. You want politics in the office space. You want politics everywhere, because if you can put politics into as much of the world as possible, then you can use the coercive power of the law to continually strengthen and enrich yourself. And that's why the progressives have to politicize everything, from 10-year-old girls' sexual identity all the way down. It all comes down to power. And that's why, to begin to get to your question, Daryl, that's why the vast majority of politicians are R-type people, and that's also why the progressives have their best minds go into politics. Conservatives' best minds go into business or the military. These are areas where skill and intelligence will be rewarded, because the rules favor people with skill and intelligence. This is why the rules are there, so that your skill and your intelligence will be allowed to produce its own outcome. But these people don't have these beliefs. They don't believe in competition. They know they can't. They know they can't be the big man on campus, so they don't want you out there competing. They want you under the rule of law, which is determined by them, changed by them at will. And if there's a certain set of election rules that gets a Democrat elected, then they'll go with that. And if those same rules then favor the Republican, then they'll change those laws. And if that keeps the Republican out, then when it comes back to a Democrat again, then they'll change them back again in order to get what they want. They don't see it as cheating. So when you say, how can these people live with themselves? It's a null question. It's like asking a rock how it can live with the moss. The rock doesn't care. It doesn't even know it's there. It's not in their nature. They don't have it. So most politicians, Daryl, are not good people. And that's why politicians have been hated and despised and mocked, not only throughout the history of our country, but throughout the history of every country, every society, every civilization, going back to the beginning of writing, has nothing but disrespect for politicians and contempt for them. And the reason that they have contempt for them is because the politician throughout history and throughout cultures everywhere has been known to do the cuttlefish thing, which is to say what you want to hear and make promises and then proceed to break them. If you want me to be a little dainty female, then that's what I'll be. And then down you go. You're inside. Now you can do whatever you want to. So there are a few politicians, but you're going to find, I suspect, that the very few politicians who are in fact good people, people of principle, who are not compromisers, you will find, I bet you almost without exception, almost all of them are Republicans, by the way, and it's very few Republicans. But you will find that the people who are genuinely good people, who are in it for public service, you will find that because they're in it for public service as a choice rather than a necessity, that they don't stay in politics very long. And they're often not good at it. This is why we don't have Trey Gowdy anymore. And Chavez and two or three others, that were actual, honest to God, men of principle, and women of principle too. They don't stay very long. And they don't stay very long because they don't have to. They don't need it. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why the left has made politics in everything and also made it so miserably unpleasant, and you can ask Mr. Kavanaugh about what politics in America is like on a personal level. You see, the more unpleasant they make it, the uglier they make it, the more character assassination and the more of this mudslinging and filth, the dirtier they make the process, the better it is for them, because people who don't want to get that dirty and who do not need to get that dirty don't play the game anymore. And that's how they win. So allow me to answer the question that has been proposed, as I would say, probably 35 or 40 times in the comment section going on live. Are they winning? Are the R's winning? I would say yes, but this entire theory has some inescapable consequences. And the inescapable consequences are that the huge majority of human history and the human future as well will be a future that is set to enhance K characteristics. The amounts of time that human societies have provided enough wealth and enough security for the leaders, at least, to behave like rabbits and not care about the future, just go out there and eat and eat and eat, you could probably count in, I don't know, certainly less than 1,000 years of human history, and I mean in aggregate. Probably a couple hundred years of the Roman Empire, maybe 100 years of the Athenians and the Greeks, a couple hundred years for America, and so on, where you could afford to be where you could afford to treat the world as if it was an endless field of clover, where work doesn't matter, discipline doesn't matter, debt doesn't matter, playing by the rules doesn't matter. There's just so much stuff. Just go out and get your stuff. What difference does it make? The number of the periods of human history that allow that kind of R-type behavior that we're seeing now are very short. And that's the bad news. And the best way I've ever heard this described was pretty much it. If you want to understand the cycle of history, why history repeats itself, people just kind of rhymes. No, it repeats itself. The statement is those who don't learn the lessons of history will have to repeat them. And that has been kind of vulgarized into history repeats itself, but it is actually history repeats itself, because if the argument is that the people who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, then it is in human nature to not learn from history. We don't want to learn from history. If we wanted to learn from history, we'd be in great shape. We'd all be speaking Latin now, probably. So here's the cycle. Here's human history. You want to know how human history works? It's real simple. Bad times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. Bad times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. Bad times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. And on and on and on and on and on. And we never, ever, ever learn. And You have to accept the fact that we will never learn. That all of the things that were put into us, we have never had a more successful society than this, and the way to achieve this success has never been clearer. I said the other day, if people who are marching up on the border from Honduras and Venezuela, leaving these hellholes, it makes me want to break into the secret vault where we keep the Constitution and publish it and make it something that other people could read instead of keeping it top secret the way we have for 250 years and not letting anybody know what the possible magic formula is. Here's the formula. It works great for us. It's worked great for us. And as long as we played by the rule book in this Constitution, we've become fantastically successful and fantastically safe. And it's not a mystery. And here it is. Yeah, but that's a lot of work. Yes, it is. You got to get up in the morning, go to work. And you don't get to be a poet. You have to be a janitor. You have to be a janitor so that your kid can be a mechanic, and then his kid can be a doctor, and then the doctor's kid can be a poet. You don't get. It's not on the table for you, man. It's gone. My grandfather, I found out relatively late in my life, wanted to be a writer his whole life. Wanted to be a writer. He was descended from the children of mill workers and coal miners in Wigan in Lancashire in England, and he wanted to be a writer. My grandfather, Ernie, who I never met, wanted to be a writer, wrote a bunch of stuff that my Aunt Marty, his daughter, kept. And from the fragments of it I've read, he's a pretty good writer. But he wanted to be a writer, but he couldn't be a writer. And the reason he couldn't be a writer, the reason it was off the table for him, was because he had 7 kids he had to feed. And you don't get to feed 7 kids by writing stuff that you want to do. In his particular case, you feed 7 kids by becoming part of the bleeding edge technology revolution and becoming a telephone lineman. And that's what he did. He hung telephone lines, which was state of the art when he got here in 1915. And so he didn't get to be a writer. He had to sacrifice what he wanted for his kids. And one of those kids didn't have to be a telephone lineman. He had, because of the sacrifices of his father, he had a chance to be a hotel manager. And because the hotel manager made sacrifices for his kid gets to be a writer. And there's nothing I can do about that or change it. There's no way to make my grandfather in that situation be a writer. He's in a K society. I'm in an R society. So to answer your question, are the R's winning? Yes. Are they going to win? No. They cannot win. Because the second that the world becomes abundant enough for them to start to prosper, that begins the seeds of the destruction that lead to the whole cycle starting again. And it's much harder to build than it is to destroy. So civilization takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years and then just collapses in a decade or two. Many people have said, can we get out of this? Can the cycle ever be broken? There's a great question here from on that topic called GMO Freedom. Says, can the cycle ever be broken? I think that's what conservatism tries to do, is to instantiate. I've never heard that word. It's a great word. Instantiate the wisdom of the past into the future. Precisely right. That's why you're watching the show. That's why I do the thinking I do and the reading I do. All of the answers I need are not in front of me, they're behind me. All of the answers in human behavior, all of it is in the past. It's been repeated again and again and again. And I'm telling you about it because you're interested in it, and I've listened to many other people who I've gotten my stuff from because we don't want to make the same mistakes. We like the fact that we managed to get rid of all of the predators and all of the murderers and all of the other things and live like people have never lived before. We like it and we'd like to maintain it, and we can see what's causing its destruction. We know what's causing its destruction. And we want to stop it, but we can't stop it. That's my answer. Can it be stopped? No. It cannot be stopped. Does that mean that it's not worth the fight? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that the cycle has built into it its own destruction, and it also has built into it its own rebirth, which is why the yin-yang thing is actually very, very brilliant. Not only is it that as one is rising, the other is descending, but the white dot in the black and the black dot in the white is the way to say that the the germ of the alternative is built into whatever you happen to have. So right now we live in our society, and it's going to collapse. It has to collapse. And I don't know when it's going to collapse. And there we go. Somebody's already got it. Somebody's got it in the comment section. A not 47 yet. Okay. Yeah, he's got it exactly. So he came up with the answer to the magical question that all of you are disturbed by. All of you are, as I am, deeply dismayed and filled with despair over this, and trying everything in their power to not accept the truth of it. And I tried to accept the truth of it, try not to accept the truth of it too. But and not 47 yet has the answer. And the answer is we do what we do to preserve the remnant. That's what he wrote. Preserve the remnant. That's it. Our job is to make sure that that little black dot of yang survives, and then it will eventually grow, and life will get better and better and better as every generation goes along until people are born into affluence, at which point things will start to collapse very quickly. And for those of you who are terrified about this, or at the very least very worried about this, I would just tell you one thing. I talk to civilizational collapse and so on. It's not an experience I've had yet, and I love to tell you I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not. But what I've learned from history is that when things were the hardest is when people were the happiest. And that in virtually every single case I can come up with, I find that people who survived the Blitz during the early stages of World War II said that they were people being blown to atoms, just blown to pink goo all over the place, everywhere they looked. But they never were happier. They were never more alive, never more united, never more any of these things. That this was, in fact, it. And so many soldiers and sailors and airmen and so on and lived in World War II. Steve Darrow's watching out for my date clock. Thank you, Steve. I just got a text from my beautiful wife that she's on her way over, so I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I'll save my super epic rant for next time because I love it. It's really great. So you talk to guys who were in horrible places, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Normandy, flying missions over Frankfurt in subs and all of it. A lot of those guys didn't come back, and it scarred a lot of those people, but it also remains, I think, virtually without exception for them, the happiest times of their life in terms of their memories. I'm not saying that people who went to who fought and survived Iwo Jima just love to celebrate the memories of the swell times they had on Iwo Jima. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that so much of the self-destruction that's going on is a result of the fact that we're built for hardship, and when there is no hardship, we'll make our own. We have to make our own. So that's how we stay alive. Stout Cat wins the internet. I think we showed this last week. Our last episode, which is a month ago now, I guess, the Four Yorkshiremen sketch. House, you were lucky to live in an house. We used to live in one room, all 26 of us. No furniture, half the floor was missing, and we were all huddled together in one corner for fear of falling. But we were happy. It's a joke. It's comic, but it's true. So look, right now, if you're one of us, we are living in the best of times. We really are. And I don't mean the best of times for this cycle. I mean, if you think about it, we're living in the best of times for K-type people because we have all of the luxuries and all of the security and all of the clover that rabbits need, and we get to enjoy it. And at the same time, we don't have to become rabbits in order to do it. It's our curse to watch these things get weaker. That's the curse. We don't have to go out. Guys my age didn't have to go ashore on Iwo Jima. I didn't have to go ashore on Iwo Jima, and we didn't have to fly B-17s over Germany, and we didn't have to do any of those horrible things. We get to live in luxury, but our curse is we get to watch it starting to fall apart. And the guys who did live through those horrible things had the pleasure of being proud of a country that was on its way up. I do not plan to let America go on my watch. That's my goal. That's why I'm doing what I do. I'm not going to let it happen on my watch. And if pieces of it fall off, I'd rather have that happen. This is why the California thing doesn't bother me very much. This is why I'm actually kind of glad that California is getting nuttier and nuttier and nuttier. To me, California is a branch on a tree that has been so infested and sick and ill that it's good for the tree for this branch to fall off. And so if it turns out that America, as we understand it, is reduced to Idaho, Texas, and Oklahoma, and, Utah, okay. It started out smaller than that. I think all of the problems that we have today, if you want to ask the problem, all of them comes down to the fact that the government is too big. It's just too big. It's unaccountably big. It doesn't respond to anything. It has no. It's an avalanche. It's an uncontrollable force of momentum that can't be steered. And since it can't be controlled, it's not really a government, is it? It's this thing that we've created. So some people say, well, we've created it. Might as well live a great life and have as much fun as we can, and our kids, at least I don't have to see it happen. I find that attitude just repulsive. I just will not ever get to that place. I'm thinking about the future of this country all the time. I'm thinking about the future of this country 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 400 years from now. I know I can't predict it, but I also have a general sketchy idea of how things are going to go, because they're going to go the way they've gone before. So one of the reasons we sit here and have this conversation 200 times now, me just blabbing on and on and on, and you people through some miracle of I don't know, must be medically induced comas or whatever the case may be, you're watching all of this. We're watching all of this because we want to know what's coming. We want to know how to survive it. We want to know how to preserve it. We want to share our experiences and our wisdom with each other, so that we will keep that flame alive. And as long as the flame is alive, it doesn't really matter what happens. It doesn't really matter. It's the flame that we worship. It's the civilizational idea that we worry about. And that idea of freedom and science and sacrifice and all of the fine things in life, that idea is not only not going to be destroyed, it's immortal and it's indestructible. And it's indestructible because some percentage of the population has a burning desire to carry that torch, and chances are very, very, very good, exceedingly good, that you're one of those people. So here we are. And since my beautiful wife's on her way, I thought I might just close by telling you that this show, as all the other 199 that preceded it, is made possible by a very small group of very dedicated people who are the members at BillWhittle.com, who have not only put up with my previously pretty spotty output in terms of constant products. They put up with website catastrophes. They put up with everything. They just put up with everything. And they do it because, I guess because they understand that, that I'm just the mouthpiece for this whole thing. It's not my philosophy. I didn't invent it, and I certainly didn't risk my life to defend it. That is a debt I owe to other people. My ability to pay off this debt to the degree that I'm able is to try and make it clearer to understand, because once you understand it, you never leave it, and you'll be with it forever. All right, that'll do it. Thank you, and thank you, Steve, and all the rest of you, for joining us. And this will conclude episode 200 of the Stratosphere Lounge, which was a really fun show. And again, deep apologies for the delay. But nothing has to be redacted on this one or edited, so I'm going to just simply stop this thing at 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 17 seconds, and I am going to upload it directly to YouTube, and I'll get the other two done. I just have to edit them. I have to redact the stuff, and then I'll have to output them, and it's just work that I haven't had the time for, but I will get to it. I'll try and get it done tomorrow. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to now hit the goodbye button for our YouTube friends, where most of the people watch the show, and very few, I guess, people on YouTube have ever watched the show live. But if you get a chance, there's a lot of things that you might like, you might learn. So as far as the recorded version of the show goes, thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you next week.